Was in the parking lot when I felt a loud bang. Karen had just crashed straight into my car. The problem? Instead of apologizing, she went off screaming that I hit her and that she was going to sue me. Fortunately, there were witnesses and cameras, and the twist at the end? Too satisfying. I knew that parking lot was a nightmare, but I had no idea that my car was about to become a punching bag in the hands of the most inconvenient person in town. It was a quiet afternoon. I'd gone to the market to buy half a dozen things, nothing major. I parked my car in a perfect space, neither too far from the entrance nor too close to the unruly carts that always scrape someone's bodywork. I did my shopping, picked up my cart, and, when I got back to the parking lot, my heart stopped. There she was, backwards, wearing a bright pink blazer that looked like it had been ripped out of an 80s catalog, holding a cell phone with one of her fake nails falling off. But the most important thing? Her car was stuck to mine. I blinked, trying to understand. Was my eyesight failing? Had I eaten something bad and was hallucinating? No, it wasn't possible. The woman had hit my car. What surprised me most was her posture. She stood there, impassive, looking at her cell phone as if it had parked perfectly. Not a hint of guilt, not a sign of concern. Nothing at all. I took a deep breath. Maybe it was a mistake. Maybe it was one of those light touches that don't even leave a mark. But when I walked to my car and saw the huge dent in the bumper, my blood rushed. "Hey, lady," I said, trying to be civil. She didn't even look up from her cell phone. "You hit my car." Now she looked at me, but instead of having that guilty look that any normal human being would have after taking a dump, she rolled her eyes as if I was the problem. Wow, what an exaggeration. It was just a touch. Just a touch. Just a touch? My bumper looked like it had come out of a street fight, and she was giving me just one touch. I just stared at that creature, trying to process the level of brazenness. Most people would get nervous, maybe apologize, ask if there was any damage. But not this woman. She snorted, as if I was taking up her precious time with my petty nonsense about wanting my car not to be destroyed in the market parking lot. Look, I'm in a hurry. If it was something serious, the alarm would have gone off, wouldn't it? Of course. Cars now came with a serious crash sensor that triggered sirens and set off fireworks. I was still standing there, in shock at the absurdity of the situation, when she simply got into the car, started the engine, and tried to drive off as if nothing had happened. But I wasn't going to leave it at that. Not this time. It took my brain a few seconds to process the scene. She was trying to leave. She simply started the car, threw her bag on the passenger seat, and put her hand on the gear shift, as if her bumper wasn't embedded in my car. Instinct took over before I could think straight. I threw myself in front of her vehicle, arms open as if I were in the middle of a protest. "What happened?" She honked at me. I realized then that I wasn't dealing with a normal human being. Anyone in their right mind would have been nervous, got out of the car to check the damage, apologized, or at least feigned an ounce of regret. But no, she was angry with me. The woman opened the window with the delicacy of a tractor knocking down a wall. Her gaze was a mixture of contempt and boredom, as if I were an insistent mosquito buzzing around her ear. I could already feel my blood boiling. My car, which was no luxury model but was still mine, was lying there, destroyed. And she, who had caused it all, was treating me like I was an inconvenience in her life. I rested my hands on the side of her car and took a closer look at the small collision that she insisted on minimizing. My bumper was bent inwards, and hers wasn't much better. The most impressive detail? Her headlight was cracked. This meant that the hit was nothing. It was strong enough to break an essential component, but she didn't seem to care. She was more concerned with getting away than facing the consequences of what she'd done. And that's when she pulled off her great masterstroke. She got out of the car, crossed her arms, and looked at me with a cynical smile on her face. That smile gave me an immediate bad feeling. I already knew something absurd was coming, but not even in my worst nightmares could I have imagined what would come out of her mouth. She pointed at me and, with the greatest naturalness in the world, said that I had hit her. Do you know when you feel your brain frying because reality has just collapsed? That's what happened to me. Not only did she deny her guilt, she completely reversed the situation, turning me into the villain of the story. According to her, I reversed and hit her car on purpose. It didn't matter that the damage was in front of her car, an area that didn't even make sense to the distorted version of reality she was trying to create. It didn't matter that my car was stopped and turned off when I went shopping. In her mind, the facts were mere obstacles to the narrative she wanted to tell. And then, as if she had just solved a great detective case, she picked up her cell phone and started dialing a number. Guess who? The police. She was about to turn an obvious collision, caused by herself, into a crime scene where I was the culprit. And that's when I realized I was about to experience the most ridiculous situation of my life. When I saw that she really was calling the police, my soul left my body for a second. I blinked, looked around, trying to find a hidden camera. This had to be a prank, but it wasn't. She was serious. And worse, she was acting. The woman held her cell phone in one hand and gestured dramatically with the other, as if she were reporting an armed robbery. From the tone of her voice, anyone passing by would think she had just survived a kidnapping. She described the crash as if I had thrown my car at hers with the clear intention of destroying it. She spoke with such conviction that, for a moment, I almost began to doubt my own sanity. Perhaps I had fallen asleep at the wheel without realizing it. Maybe I really had crashed into her and blocked out the memory out of sheer denial. No, wait a minute. My car was parked, but that didn't matter to her. For this woman, reality was an adjustable detail according to her needs. And then, as if things couldn't get any worse, she threw herself to the ground. Yes, without warning, she collapsed onto the asphalt, with an exaggerated groan that sounded more like a bad scene from a Mexican soap opera. She put her hand to her forehead, taking a deep breath as if she was about to lose consciousness. A small group of onlookers began to form around her, and what's worse, some people began to believe her. "Does anyone have any water for her?" asked a woman in the crowd. Water? I needed a strong sip of something to get me through this horror show. Meanwhile, I continued to stand there, trying to decide whether to argue, laugh, or just give up on my faith in humanity. I could see the looks on the faces of the people around me, some of whom were already staring at me as if I were a monster for running over that poor woman. And then, like a godsend, one of the market's security guards appeared. I recognized the guy because he had already helped me once, when a crazy man tried to leave without paying for a bag full of meat. He looked at the scene, and, instead of running to help the woman on the ground, he did something no one else had done up to that point. He looked at the cars. He approached the damage, looked at the dents, then looked at her, who was still doing her cheap theater. He seemed to be trying to connect the dots. I could see in his face that something didn't add up. Meanwhile, the woman realized that the show wasn't having the expected effect. Then, as if a miracle had happened, she stood up with an exaggerated groan, as if she had just received a divine call. The surrounding audience sighed with relief, as if she had come back from the dead. And then, the icing on the cake. The police car arrived. My heart leapt. Now things were going to work out, right? I was going to point out the facts, show that my car was parked, that I had done absolutely nothing, and the woman was finally going to be held responsible. But I wasn't counting on one thing. The police didn't know about the play that had just taken place. They just saw a desperate woman, with her hands on her knees, panting, pointing at me and saying, "He did it. He hit my car and hurt me." And there I knew that this story was far from over. The policeman got out of the car with the posture of someone who has had enough before even understanding the situation. I could already imagine what was going through their heads. Another traffic accident, another parking lot chill. The problem? They arrived after the woman's theater show. They didn't see her throw herself to the ground. They didn't see her play the wronged victim. They didn't see her dramatic outburst. All they had was what was in front of them. A disheveled woman, panting and desperate, pointing at a guy who, in this case, was me. She kept panting as if she had just run a marathon, one hand on her forehead, the other resting on her car, pretending she could barely hold herself up. It was a pathetic spectacle, but it worked. I could see in the policeman's eyes that at least one of them was starting to buy the story. The woman started pouring out a stream of words so fast that I could barely keep up. It was a veritable remix of fiction and reality. According to her, I had backed up on purpose, hitting her car violently. Not satisfied, I'd got out of the car in a rage and gone after her, shouting, scaring her to the point where she'd almost fainted with fear. I felt a knot in my stomach. It wasn't just the accusation of being hit. She was painting me as an aggressive lunatic. The policeman, who seemed most impatient, turned to me and asked the question I was expecting. "Can you explain to me what happened?" And that's when I realized that I had an even bigger problem than the woman lying. I was so shocked by her level of shamelessness that I hadn't even thought about what to say. Because let's be honest, anything I said would sound ridiculous. "So, officer, this woman hit my car and tried to get away. But when I confronted her, she decided to throw herself on the ground and pretend to faint, and now she's making up that I'm a dangerous maniac." It sounds like something out of a B-movie. It sounds like something crazy. I was trapped in a situation so absurd that any defense of myself sounded like a lame excuse. And the woman knew it. She stood there, catching her breath, like an exhausted actress after a dramatic monologue, letting the cops absorb her side of the story first. My only hope was the market security guard. He had arrived before the police. He knew something was strange. And, thank all the saints of patience, he opened his mouth. There are cameras in the parking lot. I don't know if the woman felt a shiver run down her spine when she heard that, but I certainly did. It was as if someone had thrown a bucket of cold water on the fire she was trying to stoke. The policeman, who seemed most skeptical, looked at the security guard and raised an eyebrow. "Cameras?" The security guard confirmed it. He said that the entire parking lot was monitored, and that all they had to do was pull up the images. I've never seen someone change expression as quickly as the woman did at that moment. A second before, she was still playing the tragic victim. The next second, her face turned pale. And then I realized she knew she had lost. But of course, a person like that doesn't give up easily. And what happened next was even more unbelievable. The situation had long passed the point of absurdity, but now there was a new ingredient in the chaos. The police. 2 officers got out of the car, and I felt a momentary sense of relief, thinking that finally someone was going to put an end to the shenanigans. My illusion. As soon as they arrived, the woman went into full victim mode. She put one of her hands on her chest, took a deep breath, as if she was about to faint again, and began to tell her version of the story. Now even more dramatic. I watched with my arms crossed, waiting for the moment when the policeman would look at the cars and realize the obvious. But in the meantime, the woman gesticulated frantically, pointed at me as if I were a criminal on the run, and even tried to squeeze a tear from the corner of her eye. The only reason things didn't get worse was because the market security guard decided to interfere. He waited patiently for the woman to finish her show, and then raised his hand, drawing the attention of the policeman. I'll never forget his words. "I think you're going to want to see this." Then things started to change. The security guard pulled out his radio and signaled to someone inside the market. Less than a minute later, another employee appeared with a tablet in his hand. It was what I had been waiting for. The market had security cameras, and they caught everything. The video started playing, and I saw on the woman's face the exact moment when the realization hit. On the screen, you could clearly see her car entering the parking lot and crashing directly into mine. No miraculous reverse on my part, no mysterious collision where I was at fault, just her, ramming her car into mine as if physics didn't exist. The policeman watched in silence. One of them crossed his arms. The other looked directly at the woman, who had now lost her victim pose. Her face turned pale. She knew she was screwed. And then came the verdict. The officers asked for her documents and the vehicle, made a few notes, and in less than 5 minutes, she was officially being fined for causing the accident. But it didn't stop there. All the theater, the attempt to frame me, the cheap soap opera scene on the floor of the parking lot, that wasn't going to go unnoticed. After a few more questions, one of the policemen turned to me and asked if I wanted to file a formal complaint for false accusation. The woman was in shock. She started stammering, tried to say that it was a misunderstanding, that she was shaken, and that maybe she had gotten confused. But it didn't stick. I was tired, but I wasn't going to miss the chance to make sure this circus had a fair ending. So, without thinking twice, I answered, "Yes, I want to press charges." And that's how, in a matter of minutes, the woman went from fake victim to real culprit. She had to pay for the damage to my car, was fined, and even had to explain herself afterwards for having made a false report. As for me, well, apart from the headache and wasted time, I left with an absolute certainty. Some people really do believe that they live in a universe where the rules don't apply to them. But fortunately, reality always picks up the bill. Have you ever had one of these in your life? That kind of person who thinks they can do whatever they want and still play the victim? Tell me in the comments. I want to know. And if you liked this video, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and leave a like, because it helps a lot. Want to see more stories like this? Click on the card and don't waste any time. See you in the next video.